Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.
All right, David Johnston, code maintainer at Morpheus. Welcome aboard.
Thanks. Good to be here, Joseph. Thanks for having me, man.
Of course, really looking forward to it. So, in this episode, we're going to dive into the concept of decentralized AI and its profound implications for our interactions with intelligent agents. The way I like to think about this is imagine AI systems that operate with the blockchain, ensuring transparency, security, and sovereignty in this space. These agentic AI systems can analyze data, make decisions, and execute tasks without centralized oversight, heralding a new era of autonomy and collaboration. So today, I hope that we can explore how the fusion of AI and blockchain is reshaping industries from finance to art. We're going to discuss the challenges and the opportunities of decentralized AI and envision a future where intelligent agents empower individuals, disrupt traditional systems as always, and redefine the boundaries of technology and creativity. All right, David. So that was sort of the setting it up. Now, I would really like to hear a little bit more about what led you down this path, a little bit about your background, all of that fun stuff, please.
Sure. Well, I've always been interested in economics and been building tech companies since I was a kid. So, freedom tech, even since the early days of Bitcoin, really sort of attracted my focus. So I went basically full-time into Bitcoin related projects in 2012, which I thought I was late at the time, but, now sounds early. Uh,
That's impressive. Yes.
yeah. And, I ended up helping in different ways, whether it was, speaking about how to build startups at the first Bitcoin conference back in 2013. Most people probably know me for writing the paper on decentralized applications. So if you've heard the term dApps, I wrote a paper proposing that as a framework in, I guess it
Very
was
cool.
October of 2013. And then after Ethereum sort of adopted that framework and came out as a platform for smart contracts and decentralized applications, that sort of put me in a position to help build each layer of the tech stack. So if you think of Bitcoin as, decentralized money, or at least digital gold, then we got, the advent of smart contracts. And then one by one, we've been able to build further and further up the tech stack, all the way to what you were talking about with smart agents and the idea of personal AI and connecting the back end of blockchain with the front end of AI, I think is the big next sort of step for the whole industry and is my current focus.
It's an amazing background and obviously an OG in this space. My only perspective is that I was trying to mine it back in 2011, and I got caught up in the biggest downfall of Mount Gox. So that's some good times and also super depressing at the same time too. Um, so all right, let's dive into Morpheus a little bit. Can you give people a better understanding of what it is, what you're working on, and what you're building?
Sure. So I read the Morpheus white paper back in September of 23, shortly after it came out. And it sort of built on this concept of how do we create a platform for smart agents, right? And a lot of people have been experimenting. Okay, I want to run generative AI locally on my own laptop, for privacy and freedom tech reasons, you know. But the Morpheus paper was really a breakthrough in a few different ways. It said, this local model stuff is great, but most people don't want to run their own hardware, right? We've learned that from Bitcoin and Ethereum. There's only about 10,000 full nodes in the entire world, despite anybody being able to run one. It's sort of a hassle, right? And so what you really need is a network, right? And you need to incentivize people to provide the models, the code, the compute, all the pieces of this decentralized AI tech stack have to be incentivized, right? And so the authors proposed a token and importantly, a fair launch, right? They said, not have a company, let's not have a foundation, just make it Bitcoin style, completely open source. Anybody can participate. If they stake some Ethereum towards the project and donate the yield, that's it. Like that's the whole concept. And I really appreciated that approach because I think that's how you build broad, deep network effects, right? Is not to let it be captured by a company or a couple of people at a foundation, but rather for the tokens to be as widely distributed as possible, right? And that really inspired the community. And then you had, sort of all the regulatory capture attempts in 23, where Google and others were lobbying to ban the open source version of the models. And that really incited people like, the hell you're banning math? Like, that's
Right,
ridiculous,
right.
And so that inspired a lot of people who said, oh, wow, this isn't 5 years away. We got to build this right now. And so myself and Eric Voorhees and a lot of early crypto people leaned in and said, all right, how do we get this off the ground? The fair launch started February of 24, and over $2 billion of staked Ethereum have flowed through the smart contracts where people deposited it and provided just the yield. And that was sort of brilliant because you didn't need a bureaucracy or a treasury or any custodial pieces. It could all be handled in the smart contract, right? And so that idea of a fair launch was really inspirational to people. And then, you ended up getting all the pieces go live one by one.
Amazing. Okay. So a few things in there that really kind of jumped out at me. One was like this idea of a platform. So I've worked with a few different platforms. One was virtuals. They all have different use cases, but do you see Morpheus as a more grand vision where people are creating agents and they can almost pull them off shelves, combine them, create workflows? Is that the idea behind this?
Yeah. So I wrote an article about that recently, this idea of having a super agent, right? I think you'll really need a personal agent to interact in the agentic economy, right? And so it's not that you're going to go and find the best agent, it's that they'll be pre-indexed and it's going to go, like you're saying, grab an agent for doing swaps or, sending ETH or, anything you could imagine, there'll be an agent for that. Just like the early days of the iPhone, like there was an app for that. That's very much the moment we're about to have with agents. There's this Cambrian explosion, like you're saying, on virtuals and Eliza and many others, right? All these frameworks have come out, but how do you do discovery? How do you do payments? How do you do capital formation? Morpheus is much more about providing those tools to everybody, regardless of which framework they're using, which blockchain they're building on. Morpheus is agnostic, right? So it's already launched on Ethereum, Base, Arbitrum. It's been coded up now for Solana, right? So it's just going to keep getting extended because Morpheus is not a consensus mechanism. It's not an L1.
Hmm.
It's a series of smart contracts, right? And it's got a registry for agents. It's got a registry for models, right? It allows people to say, hey, I want to make what I've built discoverable and for people to be able to pay me for my agent, for my model, or hey, I've got a bunch of GPUs, I want to run the compute and get rewarded for that, right? So Morpheus is much more, think of it as an aggregation layer, right? Like you're saying, that platform layer. And that very open approach has served it well. So the community has ended up hosting a lot of these decentralized AI days around all the major conferences the last year and inviting all of the players in, because Morpheus is not building any agents. It's not a
Ah,
compute. It's not competing with any of these groups. It's trying to give them the tools they need to monetize what they're already supplying and really create the demand side, right? Connect it to users who want to use those models, use those agents. So if I were to summarize it, it's sort of what Ethereum did, right? They were smart not to compete with their users. They didn't build any smart contracts. They just said, here's the EVM, right?
right.
Here's the consensus mechanism. Here's Solidity. Here's a bunch of standards. Here's tools that any builder needs. And Morpheus is very much doing that same thing, but for smart agents.
So how do you go about, that's great to hear. How do you go about onboarding either enterprise, or are you not focused on enterprise? Who are you? I know you put this out there, so hey, it's for anybody. But how do you make people feel more comfortable? Large organizations,
Mm.
consulting agencies, whatever it is, feel comfortable about actually entering into this space with this.
Well, one thing that's unique about Morpheus, and again, to draw the parallel to Ethereum is it's modular, right? You can use any model, any agent, any compute provider that you want. You're not opting into, you must use XYZ framework or you must use XYZ provider, right? Because again, the tools are agnostic, whatever you're already comfortable with is what you can use on Morpheus. So if you're already using Llama 3.3 and somebody on Morpheus is hosting it for half the cost, you're paying for the cloud, you're getting literally the same model, right? Or the same performance at a different cost point because you've got this open competition where anybody can provide the compute and get rewarded on Morpheus for doing that, right? And it's the same for agents, and it's the same for sort of each of these pieces of the tech stack. So you don't really have to do a lot of analysis like, oh, it's the same thing I wanted to use, and here I can get it in a faster, better, cheaper context, right? I think the key for decentralized AI is not to try to make the ethical arguments about privacy. Yeah, the privacy is a lot better, but that doesn't drive most people's decision making, right? What drives it is performance and price, right? And that's the area they compete on. And because these are all open source models, they're a fraction of the cost of paying for open AI, right, to give you a 90% markup on effectively the same model.
Forgive my ignorance on this. I'm just trying to figure this out. If is this something that's possible to fork so that other groups could go in there and sort of mimic this but use it for their own purposes in a way?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I mean, it's all open source. It's MIT licensed, just like Bitcoin is, for the Morpheus code. But, you know, given the network's already well established and has 100 builders on it and thousands of capital contributors and all these people offering compute and tools, I'm not sure what the benefit would be unless you wanted to create some alternative language implementation of it or something like that. You know, anybody can fork Bitcoin, but the value is really in the network
Yes.
itself, right? It's like if somebody said, "Oh, I'm going to create a competing fax, protocol." Like, okay, but there's 2 billion machines using that standard and 0 people using yours, right? So
Totally.
if there was a value there, yeah, you're welcome to take the code and fork it and create whatever version you want. But I would hope they would contribute it back to the community. That's the whole spirit of open source. And the benefit is all the interoperability and the persistence of the existing network, right? That's sort of the brilliance I think a lot of people miss about Satoshi is he figured out how the software could pay for its own hardware, right? And then it
Yeah.
truly became independent. As long as it was some guy cutting a check, it was his network, right? And
Right.
when he stopped cutting the checks or the credit card got pulled, the network went away, right? And so all of the attempts at private blockchains over the years have been complete failures because it has no persistence, it has no independence, it doesn't continue as infrastructure you can build on next year or 10 years from now, right? So I think the question has very much been settled, like public blockchains versus private blockchains, and will is getting settled in the same way right now, where it's like public open source AI is by far outperforming any of the closed systems.
And I love that ethos. It's something that's near and dear to my heart as well. Even when I'd have these conversations in 2015, 16, 17 with organizations about closed source versus open source blockchain, most like, there is no way we would ever have, like, let's talk about a law firm. So I would speak with law firms or the
Sure.
legal industry or the fintech world and say, okay, this is what's possible. You have this, you have this. If there's no way this information should never be, and I was like, right, you can parse that, you can figure out ways of doing this. Um, but it clearly moved in the direction of what we're seeing now, which you just described so eloquently. So yeah, that's right on. Um, so when we start to think about this a little bit more, what I'm trying to figure out is what is sort of the next step? Where are we going to start to see this blossom? Certain industries, areas that will take off more than others that people are going to say, oh, that's sort of the test area. If it works there, then okay, we can now then apply it to our business model.
Sure. Well, I mean, I think it already has. So the first killer app I would argue is Venice. If you've seen Venice AI, Eric Voorhees' project, it's incredible. They've racked up over 1 million users in just a few months, all on open source models, using all decentralized compute, but nobody using the app needs to know any of that. It's just beautiful, simple, free, easy to use. You don't even have to set up an account to try it out. And so they've created this frictionless Web 2 style experience for the first time for decentralized AI. And so big credit to Eric and Tina and the whole team there that have built that incredible product. And that came out of the Morpheus community, right? And even today, if you stake more tokens towards the Venice subnet, you get a free pro account, right? They're using it as that tool for payments and for bootstrapping their project, which is amazing. They did an airdrop and provided $15 million in tokens to the Morpheus community, which is incredible and very generous and sort of reflects, I think, Eric's ethos of building a broad community of people. And that is the value of any crypto project, is really its community. So I think that's the first killer app. And it's effectively competing directly now with ChatGPT and these others, but private and encrypted and stored on your device. And they're not doing advertisements. They're not mining your data, right? So it's not only better and cheaper, it also ethically aligns. And so, if you look at the history of, Linux is now 95% of all servers and,
Right.
Android's like 80% of all phones, like open source tends to win over time. And where did it go viral?
DeepSeek.
In South America.
Okay.
Viral in South America. And that was true of WhatsApp and many other applications where it's a free price point, but it's similar or better performance. Yeah, I'll just use that, right? It's the guy who's got a smartphone in the developing world. He's not going to pay $300 a year
Right.
to Microsoft, right? Like this is not even an option, but he wants a smart AI. And so they immediately started putting everything in Spanish and other languages and really went viral in the developing world. So, in some ways, we in the West have a lot of, luxury of many options. And in a lot of ways, look at crypto. Most of the adoption has happened in Nigeria, Indonesia,
Right.
Vietnam, Turkey, Argentina, right? It's these functional economies with high inflation and regulatory barriers where this is so compelling and it's like life or death amazing to them versus sort of like another option that we have or the EU. And so I think we're going to see a very similar developmental path here.
Did the slightly different topic, but did DeepSeek surprise you? Was that something that was shocking? Yeah, exactly. I was kind of curious. No, why not?
Well, it was validating because
Yeah.
I'd been saying, and the community had been saying for a year, these open source models are going to catch up, right? There's this myth going around that OpenAI was unassailable and they had all the smartest people and no one would ever make a model as good as them. I was like, what are you talking about? Because once you understand the numbers, the amount of GPUs that were mining Ethereum before they switched to proof of stake was 50 times as many as
Unbelievable.
ChatGPT 4,
It's
right?
stunning.
So there's no lack of compute
Right.
available. If you create the right incentive, people will go out of their way to provide you as much compute as you need. We've seen that with Bitcoin and Ethereum. Now we're seeing with Morpheus and Venice and all the decentralized AI projects. And shout out to Akash and SETI and Hyperbolic and the other great groups that have built these now GPU networks for decentralized AI. So they've extended that same model that was so successful with Bitcoin and Ethereum to this inference and prompting of models, right? So that's the thing that's really taken off the last year. So I actually think the sort of the Rubicon had already been crossed with probably Llama 3.3, right? Their model, especially the large one, was basically on par already with ChatGPT 4. But yeah, people woke up, I think partly because it came from outside of the US is what shocked people. Is like, okay, yeah, Meta training a big model, Elon training a big model wasn't shocking, but the fact that anybody could train a big model even outside the US and get to those levels of performance and the reasoning capabilities and the ability for it to do this chain of thought, that really surprised people, right? But we've seen Grok 3 is amazing also, and they're open sourcing their models as well. And so, it was validating because I was like, yes, open source is going to catch up. That was the entire premise of Morpheus, is open source is going to catch up and then exceed all of these proprietary systems. And what did we see yesterday? OpenAI is going back to open sourcing their models. Yeah. Gee, you don't say.
They had to.
They lost the edge of the research, right? So
So it was funny. You literally read my mind because I was going to ask the next question was going to be about a cash network. Because
Yep.
I met with the co-founder or founder last Consensus, and we walked through all this DePIN stuff. And it was like, I was like, how is this connected into with what you guys are doing? And I think you just really well said how that works. All right. So two last questions. I kind of want to get your thoughts on this. And if there's anything else that you want to talk about in terms of what you're working on, happy to hear it. Love to hear it. First is, where do you see DAOs going now? Do you think that they're actually something that has a lot of room to grow going forward, or do you think they're just so mired in too many people trying to propose different ideas and work through the voting systems that it's just too difficult to work with because it's too decentralized? What are your thoughts on DAOs?
To quote Jefferson, the Tao that governs the least governs the best. And that is as true as when he said it hundreds of years ago as it is today. I think people often confuse the purpose of governance. Governance is to prevent bad ideas, not to design products, not to, micromanage everything, not to vote on what people should eat on Tuesday. Like the idea that we have to vote on everything is draconian and nonsensical. Right? I don't want to vote on everything. I want personal liberty to choose individually what I want to do. And that's the power of blockchains is I have a private key and I can make an individual choice about, what I want to support, what transactions I want to send, right? What applications I want to use. And so I would say the gold standards where DAOs have worked well is the governance votes have a really high threshold. And what that does is it prevents bad ideas from propagating. Do you really want something that only 51% of people support?
Right.
Not really. Like, put it up at 80, put it up at 90, or better yet, have a marketplace. And that's what we've seen with Morpheus, is it has a marketplace for governance. Anybody can be a code maintainer. Anybody can put forth, a fork of one of the repositories and say, hey, I've contributed this. And, as long as they're providing value, people can use their tool and they get rewarded for it. And you can make that decision as an individual. We didn't have to take a vote to say which one was best and only use the lowest common denominator. Just have a marketplace. And so that's part of what inspired me so much about Morpheus is when I looked at the paper, I saw 5 marketplaces: marketplace for compute, marketplace for code, a marketplace for governance, a marketplace for capital, and a marketplace for effectively providing all of code, compute, capital, and finally builders, right? A marketplace for people building the end applications. Like I usually cite the example of Ethereum. People know about the ICO. People know about the GPU mining. They forget that Vitalik airdropped to every single developer who contributed to Ethereum before the Genesis block.
Hmm.
That's what got them the network effective builders. And that was criticized at the time. Oh, why are you giving away all this ETH, to these junior developers? But he understood that you needed the network effect of the builders. And that's what set Ethereum apart. People are like, oh, why do they have all developers? Because they incentivized all the developers. That's where the incentives were, right? And those people went on to build Compound and Aave and Uniswap, and all of
Yeah.
those projects came out of that early decision. And so the fact that, Morpheus has this great, division of the token emissions, right, across those 4 buckets, and then also has a marketplace for governance, I think is inspiring, and is sort of why it's grown so fast. Competitive energies are amazing. I'll take as an example audits, right? Typically, it'll take months to get on an auditor's books. It can cost you $250,000 to do a single audit in Web3. And instead, Morpheus has auditors competing
Hmm.
to get the work, to get the award, to get the incentives from the protocol. And you're talking weeks
Yeah.
instead of months,
Oh
right?
my
And
God.
so the speed at which things can move when there's a competitive market instead of a bureaucratic process is just like night and day.
Unbelievable. Okay. One last question. When I'm either at conferences attending or speaking, whatever the case is sort of the vision on where all of this is going.
Yep.
I know it's very difficult to sort of look into the crystal ball and say, okay, how does this impact? And this is more like the bigger vision about humanity and where we're going with the agents, with AI. When you take this further and further out, what does it look like first from like an employment aspect? And then second, how do we as humans fit into this equation? As you continue to develop at an exponential rate, what does it look like from your view?
Every person will have a personal super agent. And if you don't, you will not be economically relevant. And that's the same as if 20 years ago I said every person will have a smartphone. And if you don't, you won't be economically relevant. It's not that AI will take the jobs, it's that somebody using AI will take the job, right? Because AI doesn't have free will. It doesn't have ambitions and goals and biological needs. We're all going to be the oracles into the real world of what people want to accomplish. And that's not going to change. But you really, really want to have a personal AI that's rooted in your values and your goals and not some company or some government. And so I think that's the important differentiator. So yes, will it take jobs? Absolutely. And I want it to take my job. I will be happy to give it my job, and then I'm going to give it another job. And then I'm going to give my super agent another job. And hopefully in 2 or 3 years, I'll have given it 100 jobs. And I can enter this age of abundance where I'm not limited to the number of hours in the day or the mental bandwidth and brain power that I have available organically. By the end of this year, there'll be 50 trillion hours of AI brain power available compared to 7 trillion of organic brain power. If you just compare number of words a second that a person can say versus 3.3 tokens a second that an AI model can produce, if you just give that a unit of measure and call that brain power, I did that in an article recently, you're seeing that this is the year, 2025 is the year there'll be more AI brain power. And again, the key for that to be a wonderful outcome instead of a bad outcome is, do we root it in the individual, right? And that's what inspired me about Morpheus is like, wow, we really don't want to miss this boat. I want my personal wallet to control my AI with my data and my money and be executing my tasks, right? So this whole concept is sort of culminating. We've put up a website, mysuperagent.io, and this allows somebody to have a personal agent, to use all the Morpheus compute, to access all the smart agents that people have built, right? And that's, I think, where we're headed, right? Is you'll have this as the interface, right? The whole website app stuff, it's all going away, right? You're just going to tell your agent what you want to do, and it's going to go work with 100 other agents and accomplish it right in the background, right? And you're going to go on and try to explore other things you should do, other jobs you should take, other things you should delegate. So I think that's where we're headed. I think that can be amazingly positive, and will be if you've got an AI that's aligned to you.
That's the key. So what you were subscribing to is Dr. Peter Diamandis and the abundance philosophy, which I've been all over for the last 10 years. But then I started going down some paths that it seemed like, how are we going to reach AI alignment if we can't even agree on, people have different perspectives about the environment, and if we can't get 170 countries roughly on the same page about how we're going to treat this or how we're going to do it, it's going to be impossible to get everyone to agree to these set of standards that either is do no harm. And then there's philosophies about open source and that being a little bit more easy to manipulate potentially, which I love open source, but these are the things that I grapple with now, right, given what's happening so quickly. And I just don't know how as a humanity, as a collective group, we're going to be able to agree. I love what you're saying. I've gone down those paths so many times, and I really want that to be the case. I just don't know anymore. I really don't know.
So I think collective alignment is a fantasy. It will never happen. And anytime you've had collective alignment in human history, it has not been good outcomes. your collective farming and other
Yes, yes.
experiments in collectivization have killed 100 million people. So I think let's get rid of that fantasy and just call it what it is. You're going to align to the individual, and that's called a free market, right? And the fact that we're not all going to agree is okay. We have different interests and different visions and different dreams and different objectives. We want to live different places. We want to eat different food. But let's be honest, most people are pretty similar. We want to take care of our families. We want to have a good life. We want to enjoy some entertainment. We're going to go work and have purpose, right? And so I don't think we need to sort of force some collective approach. And that's what people were talking about in 23. And I think people have sort of gotten past this safetyist idea that, for some reason we should hand all these things to the government and they'll figure it out on our behalf. Like,
Right.
it's not going to, right? And so we're headed in a much better direction now that the open source models have won, that the systems are being decentralized. And again, it's a reflection of the technology of Web3, that I have the private key. It can really be my personal AI, right? Rooted in my biometrics, in my encryption, and I don't care how smart the AI gets, it's not going to break physics. It's not going to change the laws of thermodynamics, right? And that's what encryption is rooted in, right? And even if, an AI was, the worst thing is if it was
Super
centralized.
intelligence.
Yeah,
Yeah.
the super intelligence, one person had the super intelligence. If everybody has the super intelligence, it's called a marketplace, right? And intelligence won't change the number of atoms that are available or the time and attention people have available. There'll still be scarcity, and so there'll still be a market. And you want market prices and free consensual interactions between people to drive those best outcomes, right? That's what we've seen globally, and I think that's what we'll see here.
No, all right. I appreciate that very much. I think the part that I'm thinking about more is the superintelligence aspect. So when
Mm.
there's no control and we are the apes in the room, and the superintelligence is the mind above us, that's the part that like I do not understand how we would be able to distinguish between and do something right. That's the part. All the stuff you're saying right now, I totally agree with, and it makes a lot of sense in the interim.
And so if a super intelligence is out there and it's going to be ubiquitous, there's a 200 IQ, 300 IQ, 1000 IQ agent interacting with everybody. You really want your 1000 IQ agent to be representing you agentically to all the other agents, right? And not be tricked and not be exploited and not be taken advantage of, right? And what are we seeing? As soon as a new model gets released, almost instantly, everybody's using the new model, right? That's the best outcome, is not where there's some centralized force that has the smartest AI, but we all have access almost instantly to the same best, smartest AI, right? And so I wrote an article about this in 2016, right? How does blockchain help us survive the coming of strong AI? And what I argued is what we want is for good AI to get the more resources. And I'm defining bad AI as like trying to trick or steal or do fraud,
Right.
right? By definition, that's always a tiny part of the economy because it doesn't produce anything, right? It's Tolkien, right? Evil can only corrupt and cannot create, right? By definition, right? It's just taking, it's not making new life or building things, right? And so because it's now open source and transparent, I think we're in a good spot.
Awesome. Okay. Well, then I will wash from my mind what Jeffrey Hinton said is that humans are merely a stepping stone for intelligence as it continues to go past us at some point in time for its own ends. He's the godfather of AI. And so that's why I'm like, all right. We'll see.
I think we're merging, and I think that's okay. I think we
Yeah,
already have. Everybody has a, device in their pocket that is effectively an extension of their mind and their photos,
100%.
memories, and like we're already there.
Awesome. David, thank you so much. It was thought-provoking, extraordinarily helpful to understand what you guys are doing and what you're working on with Morpheus. Really appreciate your time today.
Absolutely. Great to talk to you, Joe.
All right. Thank you.
Tech Snippets Today with Joseph Raczynski.